So Brandon Buckingham, he'd be one of Sam Hyde's MD crew. He'd be friends with the likes of Joey, Big Flame, Jet Neptune and all that. Just released a documentary about the Creator Clash boxing event and the whole controversy about Sam being banned from the event by Idubbbz. And I think it really adds some interesting context to the whole Sam Hyde Idubbbz saga, whereby throughout the documentary there's interviews with Sam spliced in, and it's some of the most genuine interviews you'll see Sam give. I think it's the first time Sam has really given his proper opinion on why Idubbbz wanted to make the documentary, and then Sam's whole thought process behind the gaslighting document and kind of throwing Ian's idea of what the documentary is going to be off. Now, I decided to cover this even though my channel is MMA content, because I think Sam is kind of coming back into the mainstream a bit, and I think one potential fan base Sam could really tap into is the MMA fan base. That Sam obviously does have an interest in combat sports. I mean, he's talked about the UFC and boxing before. He's made some funny skits where he's been boxing. The whole Idubbbz boxing thing as well in the documentary, and then he even trained Harley Morenstein for the fight in the Creator Clash, where it was obvious through Sam's voice notes and how he was training Harley that he actually did have a genuine interest in trying to train him. Not so much like technical boxing advice, but how to kind of prepare yourself for a fight and how you'd face someone that's never fought before. And you don't have to be technically perfect, but if you do one or two things well, and against a guy who has no boxing experience or fighting experience, you're going to pretty much crumble them. It was pretty obvious to anyone that knows anything about combat sports. It was pretty sound advice that Sam was giving Harley. So I suppose I just think there's a fan base there that Sam can tap into and kind of further increase his profile and kind of his comeback to the mainstream a bit, as far as he can be mainstream. I'm not talking about getting on like television shows or anything like that, but just getting a huge number of YouTube subscribers and new fans. The controversy from Creator Clash kind of stemmed from the fact that Idubbbz waited until the day of the event to tell Sam and his crew that Sam wasn't welcome at the event. He's actually banned from it, despite the fact Sam had paid for 5 front row tickets costing about 10 grand. This is for a charity event now. I think it's pretty obvious to anyone that, as Sam refers to in his interview with Brandon, that Yoko Ono kind of got in Idubbbz' ear about this. There was even a podcast that Idubbbz did in the lead up to the event featuring a few people such as Keemstar and Ian's girlfriend, where the infamous "he's not brand friendly" line was said, and to maybe steelman Idubbbz' point of view is that, one, it is a charity event. Sam is obviously controversial if you're a fan of his or not, and if Sam was featured in the event in any sort of notable way, there would undoubtedly be the usual rags of newspapers talking about white supremacy and Sam Hyde tied to this event and Creator Clash attended by far-right neo-Nazi and all this crap. But there was a way to go about this that Idubbbz could have clearly done, rather than wait until the day of the event. Could have told Sam, hey, listen man, this is a charity event, there's brands here, there's a risk that if you attend, the event could be marred in a certain way, man to man. No, he waited until the day of the event, basically foregoed $10,000 that Creator Clash will have to refund Sam now. And it's just another bad look from a man who used to be all about free speech. I believe he said before, either everything's okay or nothing's okay. To kind of go to this sort of, he's not brand friendly, I'd rather not have $10,000 than have someone like Sam there, even though Idubbbz was happy to monetize Sam when he wanted to initially make his documentary. It's a pretty bad look for Idubbbz, and it's pretty embarrassing, really. Now, during his interview with Brandon is where Sam says something that I think is very interesting, and that he thinks Idubbbz, who very much switched from an edgy comedian who was not afraid of what anyone thought of him. Not necessarily a political figure, but definitely not someone you'd associate as like a leftist who was terrified of sponsors and thinks things shouldn't be said. Now, Ian his first big sort of controversy and sort of loss of reputation was the Anissa Joma OnlyFans thing, and that Idubbbz, who was so ruthlessly critical of other people, a bit of a bully really with the content cop stuff. Not that it was bad, but if you're going to put up that sort of front, you better be bulletproof yourself. And now this man has an OnlyFans girlfriend. Sort of in line with the whole hate street, the sort of sad trend of guys that made millions off fans making edgy comedy. Basically, as soon as the sponsors and YouTube starts to kind of change the way it's run, they dump their old fans, sort of insinuate that their old fans were racist and they don't want nothing to do with them, and now these are sort of changed people. Idubbbz and Ethan, they now kind of put forward this image that they're so above what they used to make, and their fans they never intended to court those old fans. It's all just sort of happenstance. It's really a case with the both of them of people having made millions losing touch with reality, or probably more so in Ethan Klein's case, someone becoming more of who he really is. But anyway, Sam kind of thinks that Idubbbz had obviously received a lot of trolling for the OnlyFans thing off a lot of, imagine 4chan sort of guys. The classic sort of right-wing trolls that will call you a cook and all this. And obviously I'd say it very much got to Idubbbz. He released that terrible video, the response video to being called a simp, where even though he says he doesn't care about all of it and he's perfectly fine with dating someone who's a sex worker, it's so obvious how he's seething inside. But Sam's kind of point of view is that Idubbbz, being so bothered by all of this, wanted to maybe make a documentary and get back at someone as kind of beloved on the right wing as Sam. You know, he's not just by the right wing, but people that like edgy comedy, people that definitely be adverse to what the likes of Idubbbz and Ethan Klein are doing now. So he wanted to come down to Sam, make a documentary kind of exposing Sam, making him look like, you know, past his prime, sort of has been, as a way of kind of making himself feel superior and better than all the guys that kind of relentlessly trolled him for the past 2 years. And this is sort of what I always thought it was from the outset. Like Turkey Tom and people like that think Idubbbz, like, I don't know how they think this, but they genuinely thought that Idubbbz was just going down there to make a documentary, and it's like he has a real old view of Idubbbz and hasn't paid attention to what the likes of him and Ethan have done in the last 2 years. I think it's like a fanboy sort of thing, but the people who thought that Idubbbz was genuinely going down there to make a good documentary don't realise that all art, all documentaries are made with an agenda behind them. You know, every video on YouTube is made with an agenda. Sam's videos are made with some sort of agenda. So Idubbbz clearly was going to do this. I think it was very obvious what someone like Idubbbz was going down there to film. It's kind of obvious from his past documentaries as well, on that guy Airsoft Fatty, where one, you know, there's some positives that you might try humanizing with an interview, show maybe his point of view on some things, but Idubbbz is very much there as the guy who's above it all and looking down on Sam and using him as comedy, like, look at this pathetic has-been sort of vibe. The one thing kind of comes to mind is Louis Theroux's documentary on Nick Fuentes, where, albeit Louis there, he's shown respect to Nick in the interview, it's very much a, wow, I can't believe this, people live like this, and I'm so above this, and I'm shocked by people like Nick, you know. But Sam, being very clever, is like a man who's managed to be as blacklisted as Sam but still be incredibly successful, has to be a very intelligent person. And I think Sam copped onto this. As soon as Sam said, as soon as he got the email about Idubbbz wanting to come down and film a documentary, he immediately knew what sort of agenda Idubbbz was going for. And that's where the whole gaslighting thing was, is that they're not going to necessarily punk Idubbbz or make him look bad, but they're not going to give him what he wants. Sam's not going to be taken for a fool, and that's why they did what they did. It's pretty much like kind of 4D chess. It reminds me a bit like the episode of Game of Thrones where Robb Stark went against Tywin Lannister, and Robb had kind of set out that he was going to send his men against Tywin's army, 20,000 versus 30,000 or something. But Robb only sent 2,000 of his men, bringing the other 18,000 around Tywin's army. Sort of like he knew what Tywin wanted and he wasn't going to meet him on his terms of engagement. And this for me pretty much summed up the whole Idubbbz Sam Hyde saga, where Sam wasn't willing to meet Idubbbz on his terms of engagement, where Idubbbz wanted to make that classic documentary where it's portraying sort of a unique character from the past, but Ian's very much the man in control and he's above it all, and more than likely the moral of the story was going to be someone like Sam who came up on edgy comedy, couldn't adapt to this new world or pushed it too far and therefore fell off. But Sam, being as smart as he is, was not going to give that to Ian, albeit he was going to give him with some entertaining footage. And I mean, the documentaries on either side were extremely entertaining, but he was too smart for Ian on this occasion. And if the Irish Candyman ever does get into the ring, this channel is going to be making tons of videos supporting him.